To break down these developing stories, we welcome now Andrij Dobriansky. He is the Director of Communications for the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America. Andrij, always great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on, Kelly.
Absolutely. So let's start with Russia, if we can. The Kremlin denying it was behind the plane crash that killed Prigozhin, though Putin had said Prigozhin made serious mistakes prior to his death. The AP now reporting that military intelligence determined an explosion caused that plane to crash. I know you don't mince words. What's your take on this one?
Yes, a plane that has a wing and a tail, a piece of the tail blown up before it hits the ground usually means that something happened to it on the inside. The important thing isn't assigning blame about, this fake investigation, trying to figure out who did it. The important thing is the fact that it happened to somebody who is ostensibly a billionaire and raised his opinion against Putin publicly. From what I'm understanding through my conversations with people who deal with information sharing and intelligence throughout the world, the important thing isn't so much that this assassination happened, because we've had numerous assassinations since the beginning of Putin's term as president, including very notably the only other possible candidate for president, Boris Nemtsov, who was shot in the middle of the street right outside the Kremlin, very visibly. It's the fact that a lot of these assassinations have been happening outside of Russia for many years, and it seems as if Putin is understanding that he cannot do that anymore. This is a billionaire I mentioned who had the ability to be in Africa and other countries. He could have been assassinated there. It's possible that Putin, now that he's under a arrest warrant by the International Criminal Court, has decided that he's going to do these political assassinations only within his country.
Wow. All right. Thank you for that analysis. And we've also learned, as outlined this week, that Moscow extended the pretrial detention for Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich until November. How do you think U.S. and Ukrainian officials are reacting?
Well, I think the important thing about the Gershkovich situation, which is tragic, much like the Brittany Griner situation we've dealt with, many other people who are still in Russian detention. I'm going to bring it back to that, incidence of the fact that the Russian president is currently, there's an international arrest warrant for him for war crimes committed in Ukraine. As people were kind of confused in this country that on the same day as a major presidential debate, we had one of the presidential candidates being awaited for his arrest here in the United States. Imagine the BRIC summit that just happened and in South Africa, but the president of Russia, who basically put this entire coalition together, wasn't able to attend because he's not allowed to leave the country. If he were to set foot in South Africa, he would get arrested. Similarly, how are international businesses, international news outlets supposed to do anything in Russia if this criminal regime continues to lock people up? This is yet another black mark for Russia. It is why they don't have an international coalition holding them up, and why we see projects like the F-16s supporting Ukraine happening, because there's so much of the world that's really supporting one side of this conflict.
Well, I do want to get to the larger implications of that arrest warrant, since it seems to be so central in both of these answers. But first, do you think this move by Moscow with Gershkovich is an attempt to set up a potential prisoner swap?
We saw what happened with Brittany Griner. The level of swap really had no logical sense. The fact that this international arms dealer, who was really wanted for crimes across the world, not just by the United States, that he was the person, Mr. Fout, who was traded for Brittany Griner. It's possible that we might get something, that Russia is seeking something that large. But at this point, I think what we heard, you teased a little bit about Mr. Sullivan's international visits and his conversations with other partners. What they're looking at is the stability of Russia. So at this point, I think for people who have their people kidnapped by Russia, held in Russian prisons, or in the case of Ukraine, 20,000 children who are currently being kidnapped by Russia, I think most of the world is looking at, does this regime even last long enough for us to do any kind of trades?
You know, can you, in 10 seconds, outline the biggest implication of that arrest warrant?
The biggest implication is what we just saw at the BRIC summit. There's no way for this president to stand on the international stage, whether it's the G20 or other massive summits. He will not be attending the United Nations General Assembly. This is a man whose time is ticking. And frankly, it's very obvious in terms of how many countries want to help Ukraine and how many are shying away from Russia.
And that could have big implications, as we both know. Andrij Dobriansky, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.